No, great. If everyone's all settled, I can get started if you guys want. So this is going to be super informal. I want you guys to interject. I'm probably going to ask you some questions. And I definitely want you to ask me questions if things come up, if there's anything that you're dying to know, or it's really weighing on you or whatever. And especially as I get talking, if you think of anything, please don't hesitate. I don't need you to save your questions till the end. But I asked, there were a lot of things I could have talked about today. I asked these guys what they thought you might be interested in. They said, well, talk about research and what it means, especially because, I took a pretty, unique research path compared to most researchers. Most people equate research with academia and professorship and tenureship. And, I didn't end up there. I ended up in industry. And I learned a lot along the way. And it all started here at Michigan State University in the sense that when I first came here as a student, I honestly thought, I'm going to go work for Microsoft or Google or something, and that's going to be it. That was my plan. It was all mapped out. It's exactly where I thought I wanted to be. And then I had some great mentors along the way who said, hey, you should really think about some of these other avenues. You should really think about what some of these other things mean. And as much as they did me a great service, they also did me a great disservice because there were certain things they didn't tell me. And the first thing I learned about computer science and about what you're doing here and even getting an undergraduate degree is what you want to do with your life, much like software development, starts with one thing. So what's the first thing any software project starts with? Anyone?
A need.
Huh?
A need.
A problem. Exactly. So the thing that you should be asking yourself today as your undergraduate students is, what kind of problems do I want to work on? In the sense that our field touches every field now. There is not a single field that exists in the world today that our field does not touch. And so if you just happen to love biology but wanted to be a developer who works on biology problems. If you like history, be a developer who develops applications for history people. If you like mathematics, then be a developer who writes programs to solve challenging math problems. There are people who do these things, right? And so I think that the real question you should ask yourself first is, well, what kind of problems do I want to work on? Now, the second question, once you know the problem that you want to work on, you should ask yourself, do I like when people give me problems in this arena? Or do I want to make the problems? Do I want to create the problems? If you don't want to create the problems, if you don't want to think about what the problems are, if you don't want to ask your own questions, then you should stop. You should stop at undergrad, maybe a master's. And the only reason you should get a master's is if you want to, further your education or learn more or gain more experience. But quite frankly, the one thing I've learned in industry is that a very talented bachelor's degree is just as good as a very talented master's degree. You think that it's going to make you maybe more hireable or not, and it may. I mean, it could, but ultimately you can get just as far with the bachelor's as you can with the master's. It'll be a bit of a different road. It'll be of a different path, but you'll go to the same place in the end. It's just a matter if you get that experience via the master's or via industry. But whether it's through a master's degree or whether it's through industry, 2 years is 2 years, quite frankly. And you'll find that out very quickly when you get into industry. So, assuming that, like me, you think to yourself, you know what, I want to ask the questions. I want to work on the problems that I want to work on. So, now you're finishing up your undergrad and you're thinking to yourself, well, where do I go? Where do I go to work on these problems? So, these are the things that I wish somebody would have told me. And the first thing is, it doesn't matter where you go. The university is absolutely irrelevant. Don't think I need to go to a Stanford or a Carnegie Mellon or an MIT. Honestly, that's the worst way you could make that decision. What you should be asking yourself is, who is working on the problems that I want to be working on, which is something you should have decided in step one. And so you should do your homework. Look it up. See what professors are doing. Talk to the professors here. They're great resources. These guys know a lot about what's happening in the field as a whole. I mean, they've based their whole life on this. They like to know what's going on out there. They might not like to work on it, but they like to know about it. And, there are a lot of people doing a lot of amazing things out there at different universities. Some of them are rock stars in small universities who people are like, well, why is this professor here? He's so amazing. He could go anywhere and teach anywhere. But they just like, they've established a family there or something. They like the environment. They like the place. They choose to work there. So you can get amazing mentorship anywhere, really. But what you need to do is find the people who are working on the problems that you want to work on. So now that you've gotten that list, you say, hey, these are people I could possibly work with. But the next step is to figure out if these are people you can actually work with. Because let me put it this way. A PhD is like a marriage. It's like a 5 to 6 year marriage. And it's a marriage that you cannot get out of unless you want to give up on your PhD. And you will quickly find that you will spend more time with this individual than you've spent with anyone else in your life. And most of the time you spend with them is not enjoyable time. It's time where they're like, I need this work done, and I need it done now. I need it done yesterday, in fact. And if you already don't get along with this individual, it is going to be 5 of the worst years of your life. Hands down. So make sure. Call them, talk to them, email them. Be like, hey, can we have a chat? I'm interested in learning more about your work. Have a conversation with them. See how you interact with them. It's like going on a blind date. You just, kind of call them up and you're like, hey, I want to take you out to dinner and learn a little bit more about you. And you'll find out whether you really jive with this person or not. I mean, some people you just don't work well with, and you know it. I mean, you talk to them, and your personalities don't blend, or, they just don't seem to work with you. You can ask them even about how they work their labs. So even at USC, I had friends in other labs where they were required to be in 8 to 5 every day, 8 to 5, no matter what. Like, do not be a minute past 8. My advisor, on the other hand, was like, I only need to see you on Friday. But when you show up on Friday, you better have some work done. If you need me before then, email me, we'll set something up. And I work very well in that environment. Not everyone does. Some people need structure, right? It's you have to be very self-disciplined if someone gives you this complete freedom where they're like, just do some work, because it's really easy to get caught in that. And that happened to me a few times, to get caught in that mix where it's like, well, I could do some of this research work, or it's Wednesday night, it's happy hour, my buddies are all off work. I'm sure after we go to happy hour, I'll come and do some work. I'm sure I will. And then Thursday rolls around, and you're like, not only did I not do any work last night, but I'm definitely not doing any work today either. And that happens. So, you just got to be careful. You got to know yourself. I would say definitely take a concerted look at yourself and say, what kind of environment am I going to thrive in? What type of person do I want to work with? And then you should try your hardest, and this is the tough part, because this is the part where you really have to work, to make that person think that they really want you. So you have to get this advisor, after you're chatting with him and everything, you have to make him think that you're the next best thing, since Michael Jordan in basketball. You got to tell this guy, like, hey, listen, I don't need you, you need me, okay? Quite frankly, I'm doing you a favor by actually letting you decide to take me as a PhD advisee. So now you're in. And now it's going to be a whirlwind of 5 years. And I'm going to tell you, and I was told this when I first started my PhD, this is the best advice I ever got. And I was told this, and I said, no way. Not me, never. This is what's going to happen to you, though. I'm going to let you all know this now. A grad student who was finishing out said, hey, have fun. I'm glad it's not me anymore, but here's what I'm going to tell you. Your first year, you're going to be so excited. You're going to be like, I love this. This is the best. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Year 2, you're going to be like, okay, this is going. I guess I'm getting some stuff done. Year 3, you're going to be like, I hate this. I want to stab everybody. This is the worst. This is the worst experience I've ever had in my life. Year 4, you're going to be like, this is still the worst experience. I still hate everyone, but I've invested so much of my life now that I cannot possibly back down at this point. And year 5, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, is it actually happening? Am I getting out of here? Is this real? And you're once again going to be as excited as you've ever been in your life. And that's how it's going to happen. And you don't think so. In year 1, you're like, why would that happen? This is so amazing. No way. This energy is going to stay up forever. And then you start getting rejections, and then your professor starts being like, well, you're not really on trajectory to finish anytime soon because you're not getting the work you need to done, and you're going to feel bad, like, oh, I'm not doing enough, but it's what everybody goes through. And you're going to go through it, I promise you. If you decide to go to grad school, you will experience this phenomenon. And if you don't, then please, please, please tell everyone else in the world how you did it, because I have not met anyone who has not done this. So then, these are the more challenging parts and the more nuanced parts. The only reason that I would ever suggest to pursue a life of research is again, because you like being able to ask the questions. You like being able to create the problems. You like being able to think, hey, what are the problems out there that I personally think would make the world a better place, and let me work on those things. What are the things that I think would progress society? So here's where you have a choice. It's not too late at this point to back out and say, you know what? I actually prefer people ask me the questions and let me work on the questions that they pose. And if you do go into industry at this point, you'll mostly work at a think tank, something like IBM, Sandia National Laboratories, Rand Corporation, which is where I got my start. And these guys ask very challenging questions, and you're going to work on problems that are going to be much harder than you probably would have worked on if you had just gone out with a bachelor's degree. And they're going to be really tough questions, and they're going to be research questions. But you're at least going to have the benefit of somebody else thinking of what those questions are and why they matter. Now, if you choose to go into academia, these are the things that you should know today, because it's the reality, and it's what all my friends experienced. The reality is that tenure is an evil, evil, evil thing for you guys, because professors are starting to get tenure now, and those guys will be there forever. They will get their tenure, and they will sit there until the end of time, until they can't work anymore. Why? Because they love the work. So why would they retire? Why would they quit? And they're guaranteed to keep that spot. And the fact is that a university can't hire somebody until somebody leaves. So what you're going to have is, because people are pushing and people are telling you, hey, now you have to go further. When it was me, it was like, you at least have to get a bachelor's. You have to get a bachelor's. You're not going to be employable if you don't get a bachelor's. People today are probably saying, you have to get a master's. You're not going to be employable if you don't get a master's. And maybe even a PhD now. But the reality is that the job market for PhDs is low. It's low because it's crowded. It's full. It's dense, and everyone is competing. You have every year, think about how many schools there are. Every year, all those schools are graduating PhD students, and all of those PhD students are fighting for that same faculty position. So what typically ends up happening at that point is you have to postdoc, because you need to pad your resume, you need to get better. You need to make yourself stand out, because this is the second marriage you're trying to get into, right? You've gone through the first marriage with your advisor, and now you're trying to marry up with the university. And again, you want to find a university that works for you, somewhere where you want to be, somewhere where you want to stay, city you want to live in, and then you have to, again, convince them, hey, I am the best thing that could ever happen to your university. You guys need me. I don't need you. I'm doing you a huge favor by being even in this university right now talking to you. And that's the reality, and it's got to be done that way. It has to be done that way because, these guys have so many candidates to choose from, and they're only going to choose the best of the best. So if you do want to go the academic route, be prepared to have that dogfight, because it will be a dogfight, and it will be one of the hardest fights you've ever had. And I've seen my friends go through it, and I've seen how hard they had to work to do it. During their postdocs, they had to publish like they've never published before. And after publishing all those publications, they had to fight in these interviews and through these recommendation letters, getting the best recommendation letters, doing the best interviews, creating the best papers, and essentially setting themselves apart from every other PhD who has graduated at that same time for these very few positions that exist nationally. And if you don't get it, then you postdoc another year, and you try again, and you do it again, and again, and again, until you finally get it. And on that day, you're once again very, very happy. And then you're happy again, and then you go through the exact same wave all again, which is trying to get tenure, where you get started, you're a new faculty member, you're like, I'm so excited, I'm going to be teaching students, this is going to be fantastic. Look at all these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed students, and then probably around year 3 or 4 or 5, you're going to be like, this is terrible, I just want tenure already, I'm working so hard, I'm working ridiculous hours. And then, of course, when you get tenure, you're going to be so excited, you're going to be like, I never have to do anything again, literally, because I have tenure, so take that, everyone. But, again, if you went that way, it's probably because you were passionate. And when you get tenure, you're going to focus on the research. You're going to focus on the problems. You're going to focus on working on the things that you really want to work on. And that's the only reason you would ever put yourself through this, is because you're really passionate about something and you want to dedicate your life to working on that thing. And if you're not that passionate about something, please, 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 please go into industry. Because it's a long road, and it's it's one of those things that's very rewarding when you get to spend your entire life working on this thing that you truly care about. But if there isn't that thing for you, then don't put yourself through that punishment, because quite frankly, you're not going to make the most money being a professor. You're not going to be the most famous being a professor. These are things that don't come with that. Unless your research is like groundbreaking, then you might be the most famous. But again, that means you would have dedicated your life to something you really cared about. So that's the one way, and it's a hard road, and it's a really fulfilling road if you're passionate about something. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying that these are things that I wish somebody would have told me going in it. And I would have understood exactly what that means when you step into that road and when you go through those things. I don't know that I would have gone back and done a PhD now. I mean, given where I ended up, I would have, but I got lucky, I guess is what I'm saying. And it was just pure luck, because if it wasn't for my research turning into a company and a career, I would have wanted to go into industry when it was all said and done. Because although I learned a lot and I didn't know what it was all about, I quickly learned that for me, I like being given problems and working on those problems. I do like them to be challenging, and I like them to be tough, but again, you could have climbed that ladder with just a bachelor's all the same. It would have taken me about the same amount of time. And it would have been probably a lot more enjoyable along the way. So for me, though, if you do go into industry, even after a PhD, the fun part is that the one thing you will get to do with the PhD that people from other backgrounds with bachelor's or master's don't get to do is they're going to throw problems at you, and you're going to have the opportunity to work on problems where they come up to you and they're like, literally nobody in the world can solve this problem. We need you to solve this problem. And that's fun. I mean, it's an exciting thing, and it's tough, and it's hard, and it's challenging. And, it's something that if you like working on things where, today you guys get assignments, you get projects, and there's an answer. There's an answer. These professors would not have given you this problem if there's not an answer. Unless it's for, extra credit, and they're like, nobody can ever solve this, but if you solve it, then you get an A in this class, period. They might do something like that, but, ultimately, these are things, and people have thought long and hard about this. When you're in industry, there are problems where they're like, nobody has done this before. But we have given this a lot of thought, and we truly think that it is doable. It's just nobody's made, the effort or taken the time to really try. And so it's one of those things where you're pretty sure there's a solution to this problem, but you're not guaranteed. And that's kind of exciting because, you're walking into this thing where it's like, if I do this, then I'm the one. I'm the one who did this before anybody else. And if it's something that's going to be used a lot, everybody is going to be using the thing that I did. Not what somebody else did, not what somebody else created, like me. I am responsible for this, and it might change the game. And so that's why I liked working in industry, and that's why I did what I did. At RAND, I was working on problems like that, but fortunately we had done a lot of research when I was an a graduate student, and that research was noticed, and it was noticed by big players, and we were approached, and we were approached by an entrepreneur who said, hey, you guys should turn this into a company because the research is there, you've done the work, you have clients interested, you'd be foolish not to. And obviously, because I spent 5 years of my life working this problem, it was something I was very excited about, it was something I was very passionate about. And so I was fortunate enough to get the best of both worlds, where I get to work on something I'm very passionate about and be in industry, essentially, which, again, I think is a much easier road, in my opinion. But I think that if that is the case, that's kind of the third trail you could blaze, which is get your PhD in a topic that is of ridiculous interest to you, that you're very passionate about, that you're very serious about, and try to push that into your own business or your own career path. And it's not an easy road, but you'd be surprised. There are a lot of resources out there, just like they are here, to help you get into grad school, to help you, move on to the next step, get a job, etc. If you really do have an idea and you want to push it, starting a business, getting venture capital is easier than you would think, to be honest. I know people say it's really challenging, and I know it's really challenging to get a startup off the ground. But if you have a great idea and you're really passionate about it, trust me, it can be done. And it can be done by anyone. There's a saying, actually, in kind of the startup world, which is everybody in their lifetime will have at least one good idea. $1 billion idea. Every single person. The problem is that only 5% of those people actually do anything about it. So if that's something you want to pursue, think about it, find that idea, and once you do, do it. I mean, there's nothing holding you back, honestly. So, and I would say that getting a PhD would be very advantageous for this, because one, it teaches you how to solve problems, how to tackle problems that have never been solved before, how to do the research, how to do the legwork, and that's hugely important in any startup. is knowing how to actually tackle this problem from the ground up and get it off the ground. So those are all the things that along the way for grad school, this talk was supposed to be about the life cycle of a graduate student. And those are all the things, literally all the things that were told to me, that weren't told to me, that I learned along the way, and that I wish I had known from the beginning. Any questions, comments?
Sorry. Oh, go for it. I've worked with just two professors, but they each gave me very conflicting advice on how to approach grad school.
Sure.
One said, if you're considering grad school, do 2 years at a startup. Let's go into industry, spend 2 years at a startup. You'll either get rich and be a millionaire and never have to work again and do the research anyway, or you'll not get $1 million and you'll go to grad school and it'll be exactly fine.
I actually wouldn't say that's conflicting advice. What they've essentially told you, here's the problem. When you start a PhD and you get 2 years in, I already told you what happens is that you're like,
right.
This is terrible, but I'm way too invested to back out now. And as I also just suggested, a startup is much like a PhD, right? In the sense that you have to do the work from the ground up. Nobody's solved this problem before. It's essentially research, but with money attached to it. And what you'll learn in those 2 years is, do I actually like this? Because that's just experience you can't get as an undergrad. And so I think what they're really telling you is take 2 years to take essentially PhD light and say, hey, do I like doing this kind of work? You'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot of the same things. You'll learn how to tackle problems. You'll learn how to do research. And if you like that stuff and you go to do your PhD afterwards, what it'll also do is expedite your PhD, because you'll have learned so many lessons about how to do that type of work before you even start doing that type of work in your PhD. What was the second one, though?
Well, the other comment I got was don't ever do anything before going to grad school, because you'll never come out of whatever it is that you did. If you go into industry, it's very likely you won't come back.
That's mostly true, I think. I think that you have to be pretty committed to saying, I think I'm really going to pursue a PhD. It's easy, let me phrase it this way, it's easy to get caught up when you're in industry. Because quite frankly, when you're a student, you're not making a lot of money. You're working a lot for very little. In fact, usually you're losing a lot of money. And then you get started and you start getting money, and you start having fun, and you start enjoying yourself. And then you think to yourself, why would I ever stop this? This is so much fun. I have money. I can get things. I can do things. I have friends. I'm happy. And quite frankly, you probably will be happy. But it's just a matter of, again, what you really want out of it, right? So that's why I say, for me, the thing I always start with is, what problems do I want to address, right? If you like just being handed problems and developing, if you love developing and that's what you want to do, then, absolutely go into industry, right? Develop, get problems, fix those problems, and continue that cycle. But you should just know that about yourself, or find that out about yourself, what problems you want to address and how you want to address those problems. Do you want to create them? Do you want to work on the most challenging problems, even if they're given to you? Do you want to work on, moderate problems that are given to you? Because the fact is, any developer, they might get some pretty challenging problems, but they're not going to get the most challenging problems. They're not going to get the problems that it's like, this probably doesn't even have an answer, but it may, and we need you to find out if that's true.
Okay, so most of us are actually trying to get into grad school. We're nowhere near grad school yet. When would you suggest would be a good time to take the GRE?
The GRE? I would start working on it your junior year. Earlier is better, to be honest, quite frankly. I would start studying soon. It's not super tough. I'm going to actually tell you guys my GRE experience. Given that you go through so much math here, this is funny because it was a raining joke in my lab. So the GRE I took was slightly different. We had 3 sections. The analytics section, which was math, that was a joke. You guys should be able to crush through that. Maybe not anymore. I don't know. When I took it, it was, though. So I got a perfect score in that section. Then there was a reasoning section that required us to write an essay. I don't know if you guys still have to do the essay section.
Yeah, it's still there.
So here's the thing, and I read a lot on how to beat the test, which I highly recommend. So for our essay, and I kid you not, and I did this. I did it to a T. I tried it out the first time, and it worked phenomenally. Every book I read said, do the following. In this essay, in all these essays, they said, first paragraph, construct a central thesis. That paragraph should do nothing else than set up a central thesis. The last sentence of that paragraph should be your central thesis. Said, Number 2, have 3 supporting paragraphs. Those supporting paragraphs should have kind of analogies to other things in real life. Try to compare a situation to something that actually happened in real life, something in the news, or something in the tech world, or something like that actually happened to support your evidence. Number 3, write a conclusion paragraph that says, in summary, I supported my argument in these ways, and that's why this is true. That was it. I did that for all 3 essays. Like, just tried to have, the support doesn't even have to be that great. It just has to be right. And so just try to have good support. And then I got a perfect score on that section too. It was probably some of the worst essays I've ever written in my life. Yeah, exactly. Now here's the funny part. There was an English section, and for us, for math and English, you could score 800 total. And I'm pretty sure this is still true. As you went along, if you were doing well, the questions dynamically got harder. If you were doing poorly, they dynamically got easier. I said I knew I was failing that section when I started getting questions like, hat is to head as scarf is to question mark. And I was like, fail. So I failed the English section miserably. Fortunately for me, my professor was like, I could care less how you did in English. I need to know that you have good analytical reasoning and good writing skills, which was the essay section. He's like, your English is irrelevant. So I got lucky there. But the funny part was we had a kid come in from China for an exchange student into our lab, and he got a perfect score in English. And his English wasn't very great. He just did great memorization. He was a really brilliant guy, and definitely over the 5 years we were there, he got much better. But they used to joke with me because they're like, dude, Zhengyu barely even speaks English and he did better than you. And I was like, yeah, I know, guys. English wasn't my strong suit. That's why I went into computer science. So, but yeah, like I said, the GRE, learn as much as you can. Like I said, the analytics section, just knowing that advice. I tested the waters. I wasn't sure how much I trusted it, but it ended up working great. So there's a lot to learn. And you can really, ultimately, the GRE is very untelling, and I think that whole system is antiquated. I don't think that really is a good judge of how good. We had people come through with perfect GRE scores across the board who dropped out because they couldn't hack it, and we had people come through who barely passed the GRE minimal marks to get in, and were some of the best PhD students we ever had. So just do well enough, and that would be my recommendation. I wouldn't worry too much. As long as every school, what you should do is every school, when you find that advisor you want to work for and what school they're at, every school does have minimum marks. Just make sure you hit those, because after that, if you've done the due diligence, if you've talked to the advisor in advance, if you've let him get to know you, they'll actually be scouting for you, because quite frankly, working with someone that passionate to work with you is the best experience an advisor can have, and they all know that, because no matter how good you may be, passion goes so much further when it comes to a PhD. Please.
What advice can you give to a master's student who's torn apart, who's torn between only getting your master's and also between pursuing
a PhD? Yeah, I think, ultimately, I think it really depends on what you want to do, because a master's is really going to be strong for getting you into places like Google and IBM and some of these other industry-based places. Whereas a PhD can get you jobs at a Google, but they're going to be really niche jobs.
Honestly, I'm not a computers. I'm an environmental engineer, so I was just interested in this talk, so I came.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, well I can give you a little more generic advice, but I guess to genericize it then, the issue is that with a master's, you'll be more marketable. You'll be more broadly marketable. With a PhD, you're going to have a specific focus, and your job openings are going to be very limited. So I would only ever recommend getting a PhD if there is a niche that you're very passionate about. And because those are the only jobs that are really going to be available. So a master's, I think, will take you a lot further in industry in a more broad way. So I think, if I told anyone anything between a master's and a PhD, it would be, if you want to have opportunity and you want to move around and you want to be mobile within the industry, get a master's. Stop there. But if you want to really just hone in somewhere and really get into a particular organization, a particular specialty, and do that thing, get a PhD.
What was your what kicked off I want a PhD for you?
Oh man.
During undergrad or?
Yeah. So my junior year, I started doing research actually with Dr. Stockman and Dr. Ofria. And I just liked it. I liked working on things that, like I said, I liked working on problems that nobody else had solved. And I liked when you solved them the most because it was just a powerful feeling, because the only thing you can tell yourself in that situation is, and maybe nobody tried, maybe it's just like, you building your ego up a little much, but you literally get to say, nobody else can do this. I did it. Like, take that, the rest of the world. Like, literally nobody else on this planet did this. I did it. And it was exciting, and it was invigorating, and it was like, one of these things where it's like, I want that feeling. I want to continually be doing that, where every day I get to wake up and be like, hey, guess what I did today? Something that nobody else in the world could do. And it was just this thing where it's like I wanted more and more and more of it. So junior and senior year, I started working with these guys. I really loved what they were doing. I got pretty excited about this idea, this concept of working on things that nobody had ever worked on before. And then I asked them, hey, what is it going to take for me to get into grad school? And they gave me a lot of guidance. They gave me a lot of direction. And I would leverage these guys for your application process. They'll help you. They'll look over your essays. They'll look over your stuff. They'll do that. Trust me. These guys really love it when people want to go into PhD programs, because that's what excites them too, right? I mean, they became professors. So take advantage of them in those application processes. Make them look over every part of your application. Be like, I tell you what, I'm going to work on this homework assignment that you gave me, and you're going to work on this homework assignment that I gave you. Deal? And so, yeah, I mean, use them. And that's what got me motivated, is just actually doing some undergraduate research.
I want to ask kind of a broad question. Like, what did you do here during your time at MSU? Were you involved in organizations or anything, and did that help?
I did everything. Yeah, I was literally involved in everything you could probably be involved in. I joined a fraternity. I joined an academic fraternity. I was president of ACM. I did, in the fraternity, I was the treasurer for like the larger fraternal organizations. Like they have like this bigger council. I was in the, like there's the fraternity that's like the honors fraternity, computer science, I forget the name of it. I did that. We actually started that back up. They didn't even have a chapter. And we started that. Dr. Stockman helped us lead the charge. We had to have like so many qualified people, and we all had to like do it together. So a few of us got together and did that. I went out a lot on Hagedorn and Grand River and all these places. So house parties and bars and stuff. I went to games. I was in the lower bowl is zone for all 4 years of basketball. I went to the football games. Those were back in the John L. Smith days before we got D'Antonio, who is a monster. And I'm so excited that we got. Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of things. I played poker. I would drive down to Greektown sometimes to play some poker. So, like I said, I did it all. I had fun. It was great. I mean, I love my time here. Michigan State is a great place, and there's a lot of opportunity here. And I would definitely encourage you guys to get involved in as much as you can. Now, in terms of your second part of your question was how much did that really help me? Marginally. The reality is that when a professor looks at you, they're going to look at a few factors. They're going to look at your GPA because they're going to want to make sure you're at least doing okay. Now, that's not a make or break criteria. You'd be surprised. I was surprised. Because the one thing my advisor, the big service, actually this is something else I should tell you about the process too. The biggest service my advisor ever did for me is he let us sit in on every single PhD student decision he ever made. And he walked us through his logic for it. So the first thing he would do is he would say, I only want the applications that have this GPA or higher. That was it for the GPA. That was all he cared about. It's like he had a mark for himself that he had set, a benchmark, and if you pass that benchmark, then you pass. It was a pass-fail situation. So GPA is done. Second thing he wants to look at, go ahead.
Did you tell us what that mark was, or?
Yeah, for him it was 3.7. 3.7 was the mark. And sometimes if he didn't, so the other thing that he did is he always wanted to have at least 2 to 3 people that he was interested in making an offer to. If he didn't find those 2 to 3 in that, he would lower it to 3.5. So there was like a second cutoff if there weren't enough good candidates in the 3.7 or higher boundary. But no lower than 3.5 was the mark for him. But again, I know that a lot of professors will take the advisor I got is one of the most well-known people in artificial intelligence. He's actually won a AAAI Lifetime Achievement Award. So a lot of professors will have lower marks than that even. So, don't let that discourage you if you do fall below that boundary or anything. I think that it varies from professor to professor, and the things they're looking for can go a lot deeper than that. Oh, okay. So after that, the second thing was what type of coursework did you take, right? So that this is why it could go lower. If you had lower marks, but your coursework was just as strong as it gets, really tough courses, really hard things, you were clearly really pushing yourself, he would take that into consideration. And he would be like, okay, this person obviously really pushed themselves, did a lot of work. And then the next thing, and this was probably the most important for my advisor, is if you had any prior research experience at all, anything. So if you can do research your junior and senior year, that was number one for him. If you passed that GPA mark and you had research, you were almost a shoo-in. If you published a paper, he would read your paper. If he liked your paper, you were a definitive shoo-in. Because the thing is, all he wants to know is two things. One, can you hack it, which is why he wants to know is your GPA okay, is your coursework okay, etc. And two, do you actually even know how to do research at all, or am I going to have to train you from ground zero? Because if you already have some training, it's going to make my life easier. And if your paper is good, it means you've already had really good training, and we can hit the floor running and do really great research. And this is why I said marginally. The last thing he would look at is if he kind of liked you, but he was on the fence, he would look at your extracurriculars to see if it could push him over the fence. And against the GPA too, right? If the GPA was a little lower, but he was like, oh, super involved though in all these organizations, so that makes sense, kind of a thing. So those were the big criteria for my advisor. And I think most advisors treat it this way because, quite frankly, much like the GRE doesn't tell you very much, GPA only tells you so much. And what you will find in your PhD program, even with your peers who are getting their PhDs, is that the people who truly, truly succeed are the people who are most passionate, regardless of what their GPA was before that. Because they push themselves the hardest, they do the best work, they really care about the problems. Anything else?
Yeah, so finding somebody you want to work with, how did you go about that? Any tips for tracking down someone?
Yeah, absolutely. First, find what you want to work on, like I said. And what happens is that narrows the field tremendously. And then what I would do from there is actually go to Google Scholar and type that in. Like if you're interested in machine learning, type in machine learning. And you'll see who's been publishing recently. And from there, look at the people who are most cited. Because the people who are most cited are probably the people who you really want to work for, because not only are they publishing, they're publishing the work that everybody else references because they're doing the best work. So yeah, absolutely. I would say go to Google Scholar, search for your topics, look for most recent publications and most cited publications. And those are the people you should seek out very first, because if you work for those people, you will succeed because they're doing the best. They're doing the best in their field. Go ahead.
Yeah, what advice would you give if you encounter, for example, an advisor that has an interesting topic, but the truth is that it's sometimes really hard to work with?
I would not get my PhD with that advisor. I might collaborate with that advisor. Honestly, those are great people to collaborate with, right? Because they're passionate about it. But the thing is, like I said, if you have to spend 5, 6, 7 years with someone, it's going to make it really unenjoyable. And quite frankly, what you can do is you can find an advisor who isn't quite working in the area you really want to work in, who you really like working with, and you can convince that advisor to do this other work. My advisor, I mean, you have to be really passionate about it and take some strong convincing. But in my time, there were 2 students who came in and said, listen, I know what you're doing, but this is this offshoot that I really want to work on that's still relevant, but totally different. And he said the same thing to both of them. He said, listen, you can do this if you want, but you're almost going to be going it alone because I don't know much about it. And if you work in my distinct area, I can give you a lot of advice. I can give you the right problems. I can help make sure your publications get accepted and help you walk through that. But if you do this other thing, the only advice I can give you is just generic advice about how to do good work and how to do good research. And I can review your papers like other people will review your papers objectively, but I can't help you make them better because I honestly won't know how.
What would you say is the best way today to get prepared, pad your resume for grad schools?
Research. Honestly, number one. The number one way to pad your resume, publish. Publish, literally get any publication. If you get one good publication at one good conference, you will be light years ahead of any other applicant. Professors look so heavily on that because the thing is, if you've been published at a well-respected conference in their arena, they already know you know how to do it. You've done it once. It's just, at that point, it's just repeating the process a bunch of times until you have enough work to defend. So. Go ahead.
Like what classes, so the numbers might not be the same anymore, but like what general classes help the most, like with the PhD, like moving forward?
Yeah, honestly, that's a tough question to answer because it really depends on the area you want to go into. But for generic classes, there's only one, really, and it will help in any area you want to go into, and that is algorithms. Algorithms, because there is no area that doesn't use some degree of algorithms, whether it's leveraging algorithms that have already been developed, or it's learning how to create your own or prove algorithms. Two things, actually, sorry. The second one is, I don't know what the class is, but proofs. Whatever class makes you prove things, that class. Because that was the point I struggled in the most in my PhD. What I'm really good at is creating great problems and finding very creative solutions to those problems. I'm really excellent at this. But I cannot tell you how many times I walked into my professor's office and I said, check this out. Here's this awesome problem. Here's the solution. Mic drop. And he's like, can you prove that it works? And I'm like, it does. I mean, here are the results. It worked. And he's like, no. But can you prove it? And it was like, whoa. I mean, I haven't proven it. I proved it like by actually doing it, right? Like I literally implemented it and it worked. And he's like, yeah, but maybe this was like a corner case, or maybe there's some corner case where it doesn't work, or And I'm like, I tried every corner case. Trust me, I tested this thing back and forth. It works. So, and obviously he's right. I mean, nobody's going to accept that as an answer, and so you have to be able to prove your work. It's not enough to just be like, hey, look, this works really well in practice, especially not in academia. You have to be able to show, hey, this works really well in practice, and provably so. So those are the two. I would say that I would re-rank those though. Proof's number one, hands down. Work on proving stuff. Work on proving stuff before you go to bed. Work on proving stuff when you wake up. When you're at lunch with your friends, prove things. Always prove things. I mean, it's just it's one of the things where if you master that, it'll make your life so much easier. So.
I was going to ask, what's the learning curve then? So you said your first year of PhD, you're super excited. Did you actually at what point did you feel actually comfortable in what you were doing?
Never. You will never feel comfortable in what you're doing. The first year, actually, the learning curve is usually pretty high because you just haven't been trained to specialize. You've been trained breadth-wise, right? So your undergrad is all about gaining some breadth and a marginal amount of depth in areas that you chose, right? I mean, you have the required classes, which is the breadth, and then you choose some few specializations and go a little deep. But a PhD is all about going deeper than anyone's ever gone before. That's the point. The whole point of your thesis is by the time you defend, you have to have a body of work that is something that nobody else has done. If somebody else has done it, if you go to your thesis and you try to defend work and somebody can point to another body of work and say, didn't this person do that? You just failed your thesis defense. That's it. You're done. They're like, get out of here. This work is useless. Somebody already did it. So, you can't be comfortable because it's stuff that nobody's worked on. Literally nobody's ever worked on it. But the first year is exciting because what you're doing is getting caught up. So the first year is learning all this stuff that you're very excited about and going through this huge learning curve. And that's why the first year is so exciting. But then you get to the end of that first year and you're like, okay, well, now I know all this. Now what? You know what I mean? What now? And that's where you have to start coming up with problems and working on things that, and why it gets frustrating and why it can be very difficult and why you can get down is because you might go down a path that seems very exciting and very lucrative and only to find out that it's just not possible. And you have to, the other thing I would recommend is you have to be willing to throw in the towel when it's time to throw in the towel. I went down some paths and it's you feel like you're almost there and you feel like you're almost there and you want to keep pushing and you want to keep pushing, but the reality is you're never going to get there. And if you don't give up, you'll be there for an extra year, an extra 2 years, an extra 3 years. I knew people who were in their 9th year of their PhD, and I did not want to be that person because I just don't know that I could have done 9 years of it. So you have to be prepared to accept defeat sometimes. and to know when that is. And that's something that I don't think I could give you any advice on. It's something you just kind of have to wrestle through. Like, when is it time to throw in the towel? Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Ask as many as you want.
Compare, like, I guess, smaller programs, so like a school like Michigan Tech, to like a larger school like Michigan State or Ohio State, like for engineering, or I guess computer science specifically, like.
For grad school?
Yeah, for grad school, like comparing, is it better to go to a smaller school? Or
Irrelevant.
a larger school?
Absolutely irrelevant. You should only ever compare advisors, and you can absolutely compare advisors. There's a guy here. Does anyone know who Neil Jain is? Some of you do. Okay. So I actually did not know who he was, but I just learned this. There's something known as the H-index. The H-index is the amount of publications you have versus the number of publications you've had cited. So, for example, say I've had 200 publications, but only 80 of those have been cited by 80 people. Then my H-index is only 80, right? So it's like the most citations versus like the most number of papers and the balance between that, right? There's some like scale on this. His H-index is 153, which is the largest in the world. He is here at MSU, meaning that guy, everything that guy publishes is gold. Like, if there were such a thing as like platinum records in computer science, that guy has all of them. And those are things you would never know, you know what I mean? But the reality is that if you work for Neil Jain and people know you work for Neil Jain, your career is made. Literally, you walk out and say, hey, I worked for Neil Jain and I did good work, hire me, and people say, yes, please. And that's what matters more. Other questions?
So
Go ahead,
to
please.
add on to that, like
Yeah.
how you're saying, like the name recognition, like so let's say you get your PhD and then you go into the industry, would people still recognize those names?
Absolutely. Because if you got your PhD and you're going into industry, it means you're going into a research relevant field. And those people constantly follow academia because academia is pushing the frontier, right? And what they want to do is let these guys do all the heavy lifting and then say, hey, this guy did something really great. We're going to steal that now and actually make it practical. And so they're going to be aware of who the rock stars are in that industry, or I guess in those areas in academia, because those guys are going to be pushing the forefront of what's doable. And industry is going to be trying to take that and actually apply it. Go ahead.
So stepping back a bit, you said the first step you should do is figure out what you want to work on. What's the best way to do that? Because I feel like every time I'm introduced to like a new set of problems, I'm like, oh, this is the coolest thing ever. This is amazing. And then a new set of problems come along, and I'm like, this is still awesome. So how do you expose yourself to enough things to even have an idea of what you would want to work on?
So honestly, if I had to take a shot at it, because I didn't do it, and it's something I wish I would have done, but looking back on it, if I had to take a shot at it, what I would first do is not do any problems. What I would do is look at what are people working on, just like literally like a think about it as like a abstract view of everything going on in the community, right? So look across the entire field, see what problems people are working on, see what innovations are coming out, see what types of things are leading to those innovations. So, you know, if they're like, for example, autonomous cars, there's a lot of things with path planning and maybe some learning and sensors, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, right? And they're all things that you could specialize in this broader thing. So I would say, you know, see what innovations are out there, see what excites you, figure out what fields excite you. Like for me, it was games, right? I loved games. I thought when I first actually came here, I thought I was going to be a game designer. And then I learned that game designers get worked to death and they don't get paid a lot. And I said, well, maybe not that then. I just wasn't that into games. I was into playing them. I found I wasn't as into designing them. You know, that's what I thought. And like I said, I quickly learned that it's not. So I think that once you find the thing that you really seem interested in, then do it, right? Like I love games. I thought I would do this, but then I got here, never programmed a day in my life, didn't really know what it meant. And then I started programming games, and I was like, well, this isn't so fun. Like I thought it would be fun, but it wasn't. And so then you just have to start testing the waters. After you found some things that seemed really cool, some fields that seemed really cool. I mean, you know, while I was here, I did bioinformatics. I did game design. I took a few business courses. I had the like craziest like class schedule ever. I mean, I took acting. I took gymnastics. I took accounting. I took I did my cognit and comm arts finally with like the game design stuff. I did economics 1 and 2. I mean, I just was all over the board. And I was just looking. I was searching for something that I would really enjoy. So finally, I took a class in AI with Dr. Brian McGarrico, who's not here anymore. He moved to Georgia Tech from here. He was a professor here. And he was working on dynamic story generation. So this was creating stories, fabricating stories out of nothing, essentially, right? Where you're just like trying to create the story content and stuff. And that's how I learned about AI. And that's when I learned about maybe applying some of these principles from games to real life. And that's when I came across Milind Tambe, who was working on game theory for security, where we're developing these games, essentially, where the board is a city. The pieces are, police officers and criminals that are running around this city. And the game is, where to put your pieces given where their pieces are going to be. And that's the games we play with our systems today, right? And it's a very fascinating game. There are a lot of nuances. Not only are you putting the pieces, but those pieces can do things. They have different skill sets. They have different capabilities, and so same with the criminals. Things are happening in the environment that you can't control, like events, weather, these are all things that affect how these pieces behave. So it was exciting. I loved it. It was very exciting.
So, side question. You've spoken a lot about how you can find a topic that you're interested in, and you can find an advisor in academia that you're interested in if you're going for that. Is there an analog for that in industry, like finding a topic that you want to work on and going to work on that topic in industry?
There is. It's not as strong, though. Quite frankly, in industry, it's a lot tougher. You can see what companies are working on problems that you like working on, but I think that ultimately, getting an advisor to be excited about you is a lot easier than getting a company to be excited about you. To get a company to be excited about you, you really have to just have the check boxes, right? The GPA, the activity, extracurriculars, etc. Get the interview. And then in an interview, you just have to wow them, right? Do a good initial interview, do a good technical interview, and just get through those steps. So it's a little less about your passion and just a little bit more about completing the steps. But, obviously there are people in industry who are working on certain things, and I think that if you know who those big organizations are, or little organizations even, right? There are some boutique places who are working on really great problems, and they do this one thing very well, right? And if you like that one thing, then you might want to apply to those places. So.
I'm going to give you a lot of words, and I'm going to try to form them into a coherent question. I'm very tied down course-wise. I'm doing 2 majors and they fit in perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
So without doing 5 years, because I want to do grad school, I know I do, I don't feel like I have a whole lot of opportunity to explore other topics. Because I know I want to do something in artificial intelligence, but I know I also have interest in game theory and graph theory and evolutionary computation and all this other stuff. But with my course load, I can't add anything to it to explore these things before I have to then go and find an advisor and move on to my PhD learning and research. So I'm feeling not rushed, but I'm going to have a hard time tying down what I really want to do and then potentially drag my PhD way on.
So yeah, I think that the other piece of advice I can give in terms of getting a PhD, and that's actually a very real problem that you're facing, especially if you have a few areas of interest and, like you said, not enough time to explore them and stuff. Some pieces of advice I'd give in this situation is explore advisors in each of those areas of interest. Then use tiebreakers like location. Honestly, okay, I would be happy working with any of these guys. So now I want to go where I want to go, et cetera. Where I'm going to be happy, where things are going to be the types of things I want. Do I want to be near the beach? Do I want to be close to family? Do I want to, all the things that might weigh into that decision. And then the actual nice part about the PhD, probably one of the only nice parts is that it is 5 years, but at that end of that 5 years, you never have to do that research again. So you might get there and find this, of the ones I was interested in, this doesn't appear to be the one. But, at that point, then I would recommend, especially if you want to explore some of these other areas before getting a professorship, I would say go into industry, like a Sandia Labs or something like that, where you'll get in because you have this expertise. But one thing I have learned about those industry research jobs is you will have flexibility to explore other paths. And you'll also have people who are experts in those fields working beside you to actually learn from and leverage and work with. And so, you're not stuck, I guess, is the point. The one place you do get stuck, though, is if you're really set on going into academia, like if that is actually your end goal, it'll just take you longer. because you'll need to, in order to get into academia, you have to be really deep in the area that you're going to be a professor for, right? So they're going to hire you because you're a specialist in cybersecurity, or because you're a specialist in machine learning, or because you're a specialist in game theory, you know? And so if you spent 5 years becoming a specialist in this thing, and you learn that, you know, I don't want to be a professor for that thing, you'll have to take another 5 years in industry, you know, building your resume in this other direction. So that's the one downside.
So we find like a postdoc position potentially be able, so like if you
That would
specialize in one area and then want to move to another, that is finding a postdoc in a lab would be able.
Yeah, that would be. That would definitely be another avenue for that. The one issue there, so the challenge there, I should say, is that professors like to hire postdocs who are knowledgeable in their field, right? Because they're supposed to help train these, new PhD students alongside them. And so if you're trying to jump an area, and that area is far enough away, it might be challenging to convince a professor, hey, I can spin up on this area quick enough and aid your students. You know what I mean? It can be done. But it would just be a hurdle to overcome, right? To be like, I know that I can learn, I can do that. You mentioned that first year learning curve. I can do that learning curve almost immediately before I even show up and be ready to roll. And if you can convince them of that, then you could definitely get that postdoc.
Right.
Because they know you know how to do the research.
Right.
You already got the PhD, so. Other questions? Please.
I was going to say, can you talk about your research like a little bit, like what you did exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did is, I'm going to give you guys a brief history lesson in game theory. So game theory was really big back in the 50s and the 60s. And, this was stuff that was pioneered by John Nash. And actually the original creator, and most people don't know this, but the original creator of game theory was John von Neumann. Nash just posited the first equilibrium. So game theory was this thing that was created, and then Nash came along and actually put some science behind it with the Nash equilibrium. But what happened was that these games were only really useful for like really trivial games. So there's this game that people love to play called The Prisoner's Dilemma, because it models the nuclear war, the Cold War we were having with Russia at the time. And the idea is that there are two choices to either cooperate or defect. Now, in this case, cooperate means don't fire nuclear weapons. Defect means fire nuclear weapons, or actually build. Sorry, I should rephrase this. Cooperate means nobody builds nuclear weapons if both people cooperate. Defect means build nuclear weapons. And so, you put these payoffs up, and in the prisoner's dilemma, it turns out that the rational decision is always to defect, which is why they built nuclear weapons and we built nuclear weapons. And it's the rational decision because if you look at this logically, if I have nuclear weapons and you don't, I can do what I want. I have all the power, I have all the say. Now, if I have nuclear weapons and you have nuclear weapons, at least I'm on even footing, right? So in both these scenarios, I'm better off than not having nuclear weapons. So if I'm always better off having nuclear weapons, then I should definitely have nuclear weapons. And that's what happened. Now, the nice part is that the second part of that game is mutually assured destruction, in the sense that if you actually launch these things, it guarantees that everybody loses. And that's what prevented them from ever being launched, because it would have just been absolute devastation. So that's it. I mean, those are the kind of games they could play. And so you couldn't really play anything of any real merit. And so there was this huge dead period in the 70s and 80s, 90s. Some stuff in economics, Stackelberg games came about, which is actually what we use. Stackelberg games are where one player can actually make a decision first, and the other players get to observe that decision and then react. And this happens in markets.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So you can actually gain an advantage in the marketplace by doing this commitment, right? So if I'm the big fish and I have all the product, and I say, well, I'm going to set my price at $1.50, I can shove someone else out of the market, right? Because that's too low for them. And they know they can't compete, and they'll fold, and after they fold, I can be like, well, guess what? Now the product's $5. And people do this, right? It's a problem, and people can leverage that advantage. And so that's what drives prices down, is as long as there can be at least two competitors who can compete. If one person is dominating the market, which is monopoly, then that's what happens, is you get this huge drop, knock everyone out, and then this huge raise where nobody's getting fair prices for this product. So, that was kind of it. But in the 2000s, my advisor actually realized to himself, it has been like 30 years since anybody's even tried to do anything with game theory. And quite frankly, processing power has expanded, memory has expanded. Computationally, we can just do things that we can never do before. Maybe we can play games that are meaningful now. Maybe we can set these things up. So all game theory really is two or more players playing a game of strategic decisions. That's how it can be summed in one sentence. Two or more players making strategic decisions where based on the decisions that are made, there's some outcome, some payoff. So he had a student who said, hey, maybe we can apply this to security. That's two players, right? A police force and a criminal. And the police force make a decision about where to be, and the criminal makes a decision about where to attack. And the payoff is whether the police caught the criminal or the criminal got away, right? So he created this very toy game. It was a neighborhood. So he built this map. It was a neighborhood, and he did it for robots, actually. The robot patrols the neighborhood in some manner, and it's a stackable game because the robot has to commit to patrolling first, right? Because, I mean, I can go out and be like, okay, there's no officer here. I'm going to steal this laptop, right? If there is an officer there, I don't have to steal the laptop, right? So I can observe the officer before I make a decision. So in this game, what he proved is how fast the robot has to be able to patrol based on the time it takes to rob a house to guarantee that no house is ever robbed, right? So that was the prove part. So he proved it. He proved that it could be done, and there was this really fascinating mixed strategy where if the robot's patrolling pattern could be predicted in any way, then he could exploit it, right? If he knew the robot always passes this house at this time and it's going to be 30 minutes before he comes again, then I can rob this house, even if he's patrolling quick enough, based on the size of the area. But if you make it unpredictable, if you make his pattern unpredictable, then you can actually make it so it's very difficult for the criminal to rob any house with any certainty. And so even though you might not always catch him, you've improved your chance to actually catch him. And so that was the initial game. And from there, we've expanded that game. So now what we're dealing with is a scenario where, our criminals, we play a Bayesian stackable game, which means we actually model each individual criminal. So there are terrorists, there are petty criminals, there are rapists, there are murderers, and these things happen with different density, right? So maybe 1% of our population is terrorists that we're dealing with. Maybe 50% are petty criminals, et cetera, right? And that's just based on historical data. How many, in the grand scheme of the world, how many of these events have transpired? What are the actual occurrence rates of these things? And then, so my research was building behavior models on these. How does a petty criminal behave versus, how is that criminal making strategic decisions versus a terrorist? And they're very different, because a terrorist strategic decision is I'm going to choose a target, and that target is my stone cold goal. And I'm going to find out as much about that target as I can. I'm going to learn as much as I can. I'm going to figure out the best way to do this, and then I'm going to attack that target. Whereas a petty criminal is purely opportunistic. They're going to just roam around, and if opportunity presents itself, they're going to attack. So how do you defeat a terrorist? You defeat a terrorist by making things as unpredictable as possible, and by actually trying to, inform them in the wrong ways, like get them to think things that aren't true, so that they'll attack in a certain way that you can actually interdict, right? You want to try to lead them down a path. Now, a petty criminal, you can't lead down a path because they're opportunistic. What you have to do there is just pure deterrence, right? You just have to be in as many places, as many times as you can. And that's how you would combat a petty criminal. And so when we play these games, we balance how much we're doing each of these things based on the distributions of people and how they behave and what their strategic thinking is. So that was the 5 years of my research, was actually trying to figure out how each of these groups behave and what the choices we can make are to combat those behaviors. Anything else? If anybody needs to go too, don't feel like you need to stick around. I know you guys have a lot of work, but for those people who do have more questions or want to hear more, do feel free to stick around. I'll stay here until we've exhausted questions. Please.
How are you continuing with that now? Actual work?
Yeah, so now we build systems. So we developed the algorithms and the ideas, and now we actually build systems that leverage machine learning and pattern recognition and other techniques like that to actually take this baseline that we've created and expand upon it. And so we're building systems, whereas I was doing the research before, we're actually building systems that can do this research for themselves. And those systems are then making recommendations. So we install this software into a police force. For example, we work with Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. So they use this system, and that system is just pulling in all this data about ongoing crimes, ongoing events, current weather, current traffic, social media. We do social media monitoring and things like that. It pulls in all this data and thinks about how each of these pieces impacts the decisions of the criminals, and then it makes tactical recommendations. Like at this moment, you have 10 people. It also knows how many people are actually on duty. But in this moment, you have 10 people on duty. Given everything that's happening in your environment at this moment, you should deploy those 10 people here, 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 and here. And you should be there, and while you're there in each of these places, these are the respective things you should be looking for. So we inform the police both where to be and why to be there. What it is that is probably going to transpire in this area, and that's the predictive policing component. So not only do we know something's going to happen here, but we know that it's most likely to be a petty theft or a rape or a murder or whatever it is. And in Los Angeles, there's unfortunately a lot of criminal data. So we have a lot of stuff to work off of. But it's really useful for them because before this system, they were just doing that on their own, right? They had their own analysts who would just try to map out the crimes and look at what's happening in times, and they were doing this all by hand, right? And so you can only do so much. A human can only do so much in this capacity. They could figure out this part of town has a lot of crime, more so than this part of town, and maybe at these times, but not always. Why? What's driving that? Was it because there was an event there? Was it because there was some? For example, they're also not just interested in crime, but they're interested in safety. So we're having a stream of accidents. Why is that? Well, maybe because there was some road closure there, right? Or something else is going on, or because it snowed, or So we're actually taking in all these data channels and actually doing analysis over all of it, pattern recognition analysis, things like that, trend analysis, and determining, what data channels influence which criminals and how. And if any of you are interested in that problem, we are aggressively hiring, which is actually one of the main reasons I was here. I talked to all the recruiting people and stuff, the new center downstairs and everything. We're hiring front-end people, we're hiring back-end people, we're hiring what we call engine people, who are the researchers who are actually working on the problems and actually working on the new IP and things like that. But we're hiring across the stack. So if anyone's graduating soon and you have interest, feel free to send me an email with your resume. Or if you just want me to take a look at your resume to apply to other places, I'm always happy to do that too. I bleed green and white. I love this place, and I would be very excited to have other Spartans working at our company. We're 12 people right now. We're growing to 28 by the end of the year. We've already raised $1.5 million, and we're hoping to close another $5 to $10 million by June. So we're well on our way, and we're located right in the heart of Silicon Beach. Does anybody here know about Silicon Beach yet? It's relatively new. Look it up because it exists. So Silicon Valley has dominated the tech world for a long time, and Los Angeles got the bright idea, hey, we're a really large city with a lot of money. We could probably compete with these guys in the tech arena. Why? Because tech is the future. So they built a corridor in Venice and Santa Monica where they just had a bunch of startups come in and they gave us a bunch of breaks and things like that. So Google just opened up a campus there. We're located there. Snapchat is located there. Pinterest was there for a little bit. Whisper's there. I don't know if any of you have heard of Whisper. They're kind of struggling, but they are a startup, yeah. But a lot of startups opening in this corridor, and we are literally 1 block from the beach. So, from my office, I can walk out the door, walk across the street, and I'm at the beach, and that's nice. But that's why it's called Silicon Beach. So, go ahead.
Going off of that, what do you look for people when you're hiring people? What do you look for in your research people or your engine people?
So in our research people, just that they have the particular skill sets that we need. A lot of, right now, for instance, we're looking for a lot of experts in machine learning because that's what we're working on a lot of. Pattern recognition would be another big one. For research purposes, we're actually also interested in UI UX people, so people who've done a lot of research on how to make these things very interactive and how to make the user experience better. That would be something we'd be interested in. We're interested in, I talked to Dr. O'Free actually because some of the evolution stuff he does, we might be interested in, can we evolve these security strategies somehow? Can we develop new tactics, new procedures, things that our system only knows what they're capable of, but can our system think about, things they might be capable of that would be super useful, and then we can make those recommendations to them hey, you're not doing this thing, but maybe if you did, it would help a lot. These are areas that we're very interested in.
So mostly PhDs or grad students?
Mostly.
Research?
Huh?
Or anyone that's done research?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for us, degree doesn't even matter. We've even hired people who don't even have a CS degree, but have like a lot of industry experience or just have really done their legwork and learned stuff. So it's just about the experience, literally. Like if you, and we make sure about that because we have a really strong technical staff. So our interview process is an entire day. And 2 hours of that is purely technical, like write this code that does these things. 2 hours of that is logic puzzles, so solve these logic puzzles. And 2 hours of that is cultural fit. Like, do we think we work well with you? Do we think you'll fit well in our environment? An hour of it is lunch, which is kind of a working lunch where we'll just kind of ping you and ask you about what you're looking for in a position to make sure that we're also a good fit for you, even if you're a good fit for us. You might be like, I don't want to work in an environment like A, B, or C. And we're like, well, that's us in a nutshell. So thanks anyways. And then the last hour is usually outro, where we give everyone a chance to, ask any questions that we haven't answered yet about, like perks and stock options and things like this. So. Have we exhausted? We good?
Just like one-on-one questions, let's come up to you next after that.
Yeah, please. I'll stick around. Absolutely. If anybody wants to talk about anything, I'll probably grab a slice of pizza.
Please do.
I hope this was useful. I mean, did you guys enjoy this?
The most frustrating thing is that no one ever talks about going into CS research besides a couple of professors if you happen to get them in a corner and you're like, hey, that thing you mentioned in class today was really cool. What is it? They're like, it's research. You should do it. And you're like, I've never heard of this thing. And everyone else is like, you do industry, you do industry, you do industry. And so
yeah,
you
absolutely.
You get a glimpse of industry and you go, that looks phenomenally boring.
Mm-hmm.
What are my options? And so no one ever talks about doing grad school or research except in these small little areas.
I agree with that. And like I said, I mean, I just got lucky, right? I had no plans towards research or academia or anything at all. Like you said, I just kind of chanced into it, right? It wasn't something that the CS department was pushing. It wasn't something that, my classes were pushing. It was just one of these things where, like you said, I was like, well, this seems fun. And, I decided to explore it. And I learned a lot. Like I said, I did want to try to impart some of the pros and cons. And there are some great pros, like I said. I love it, and it's very exciting. But there are some very concrete cons, and there are things that you should weigh out before you just decide to pursue this path. Because once you get a PhD, you can't take it away, which is kind of a weird thing to say. But, it does change your job prospects. And having that PhD tagged at the end of your title, and even if you didn't put it on your resume, I mean, these people are going to Google you, you know what I mean? And so they're not fools. And it's something you can never get rid of. And it will forever change your job landscape once you have it. So you can always, as other people suggested, you can always go work industry and then get a PhD, but you can't always get a PhD and work any industry you want. So.
Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. All right.
Eat as much pizza as you want.
Yes, Ryan.